So you've been waiting for this relationship your entire life. Someone who understands you, someone who cares, someone who wants to be close to you. And it happens. You meet someone good, someone trustworthy, someone patient, someone who genuinely loves you. At first, it feels amazing. You spend more time together, you share more of yourself, you begin imagining a future. The relationship deepens. And then something strange starts happening. You pull back, you become harder to reach. You need more space, more distance, more time alone. And you start questioning the relationship, questioning your feelings, questioning whether this is real, whether this is what you really want. The closer you get, the more uncomfortable you become. And the worst part of it is you can't explain why, because this is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted connection, you wanted love, you wanted intimacy. So why does it suddenly feel so difficult? Why does closeness feel dangerous when loneliness hurts so much? What if the problem isn't that you don't want love? What if part of what you learned long ago was that love and danger belong together? What if the very thing that you long for is also the thing that your nervous system fears the most? So welcome to Unbroken, the safe place for male survivor podcast. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. All right, what's up? What's up, my peeps, my people, my guys? Hey, what's up, and how are you guys doing? All right, it is another wonderful Thursday morning, and I'm a little bit late this morning, right? Because you guys know I usually get up and I do this like around, 5 or 6, but then it's like, okay, I look at the temperature and I'm like, oh no, it's like 62 degrees. So then I get up, open up all the windows, turn the fans on, kind of cool the place down, because then I'm going to shut it down so I don't have to turn the air conditioner on until, later this evening when it's like 84 degrees inside. And so I get up and I do that. And then I'm like, oh no, you know what? If I'm going to cook bagels, I got to do it now and turn on the stove so I can heat up the house and then let the air, of course, blow out so it'll be, cool in here. So I get up and do that. And then I'm like, oh no, I got to go do my eye exercises, because I run into this thing that says, if you do eye exercises and strengthen your eyes, they get better. Okay. So I'm trying that, and we'll see how that actually works. And so then I'm like, oh no, wait a minute, I got to do the podcast. And so, yeah. So sorry, I'm a little bit late for you guys. You probably get the announcement. You're like, hey, the podcast just dropped. And you're like, excuse me, the podcast has not dropped. So it'll drop a little bit later. Once we finish here, then I will drop it and you will be able to listen to it. Hey, I want to give a big shout out to Clive. And he's someone who follows the podcast. He listens. And, Clyde, I just want to say thank you so much just for sending your emails. And don't feel that, you're being annoying, that you're an annoying groupie. Because, when I get your emails and you share with me, you're like, hey, I listened to this podcast, and this, like, you were sitting in the room with me, and I'm using this stuff to help the people or the guys that I'm working with. And it's like it's spot on, is what you said. I mean, it's spot on. It's like I'm there in the room. And thank you for sharing that, because when you give me that feedback, that helps me to continue, right? Because sometimes I'm sitting here and I'm just wondering, like, man, is is this helping anybody? Not helping anybody? Come back and say, hey, that wasn't worth whatever. I don't hear anything, right? It's just silence. And it's often like that with survivors. Like we don't engage until we get to the point, of course, where we feel safe. And I'm glad that you feel safe enough to, to send me those emails of encouragement and keep them coming, dude. Especially if there's anything you're like, hey man, I'm dealing with this. Can you do a podcast on this? Feel free to do that, right? That really helps me to keep going. So thank you so much for that. And so if you guys have gone up to the website, you notice, like I said, we've got the social media going. So there's different ways you can contact me. You can go up, you can subscribe to the Facebook, you can subscribe to Instagram, Blue Sky, and even the YouTube channel. So just remember, if you type in Better Male Survivors, it should come up, because that's pretty much, if you want to call it, the handle for everything that is there. Shout out to my guys. We'll see you tonight, hopefully at 6 p.m. on the group coaching call, which, oh my goodness, those coaching calls are they're great. I mean, I enjoy them too. I mean, there's just, it's an opportunity. It's a safe place where, depending on what we're working on that week, we have a chance to share and to put it out there in a safe place. And I love just some of the topics and things that we talk about, things that often you don't get. Like, I'm going to say those of you doing therapy and stuff, they're like, oh, we would never talk about this. But you're among a group of guys that are experiencing some of the same things, right? And so to be able to share that in that space is really, I'm going to say, just a wonderful avenue, a wonderful space. And it's kind of like family, because you're creating these connections. All right. So we're still dealing with our series, the things that nobody told male survivors. So we're going to jump into today's episode. And today's episode is going to deal with, I'm going to say, why love feels unsafe. That's what I'm going to call it. If you listen to the intro there, that kind of gave you an idea of where we're going to be going today. And so I'm going to say the question that we're exploring when we talk about that is one, I'm going to say, that causes survivors so many issues. I always hear this: why do I pull away, when people get close? And for many survivors, the problem really isn't finding someone to love. That's not the issue. The problem begins after they find that love. And so, the relationship becomes serious, and the trust, of course, begins to grow, and emotionally that intimacy start to increase. And then, when you start seeing the other parts of them, maybe they've spent years kind of hiding some of those parts, and you get to start seeing them. And then that's often when the anxiety starts to appear, the distance appears, the conflict appears. And not because, they don't care, but it's not that they're incapable of love. And it's not because that they're trying to hurt anyone, but often they're responding to something much, much deeper, something they learned long before that relationship ever began. And so today, when we talk about exploring why that intimacy can feel both comforting and threatening at the same time. Now, you'll hear the story, I'm going to say, of a survivor. I'm going to introduce you to one. And once again, shout out to my guys. I mean, the stuff that you guys are, because I asked you guys to, hey, share a little bit of your story. And you don't have to read it, because I'm going to have, whatever the voiceover thing to read it, so you don't have to worry about that. But dude, guys, the stuff that you guys are sending is just really good. So we're going to listen to one today. And so as we hear that story of a survivor who desperately wanted connection, but he found himself kind of pulling away whenever it became real. And so, we'll look at, of course, the CSA, the childhood sexual abuse, and how it can, confuse meanings of love. This is a big area for us. Oftentimes I'll end the podcast and I'll say something, hey, I just want you to know there's someone out there who loves you, who's talking to you right now. But for a lot of us as male survivors, we start using that L word, and it's like, oh, it just feels really uncomfortable because the way that we experienced it through the sexual abuse makes it very challenging to sometimes even use that word. And so we get our meanings of love is confused. Affection, safety, and vulnerability are all thrown in there. And so it has a different meaning for us oftentimes. And so, we'll talk a little bit about how the healing begins for survivors. Now, here's the thing. Many of us as survivors, we really aren't afraid of love. And you might be thinking, I just don't know what to do. But you might be actually afraid of what love has cost you before. Okay. What has it cost you before? And I shared the story with you so many times. Like I tell people, it's like, yeah, I still got the rings that I had purchased, right, for the engagement, but I felt like I needed to be upfront and I need to say, hey, these things come with me, right? And so I shared and was vulnerable. And I realized, like I said, the other person, it was like, they were like, whoa, that's too much for me to handle. I don't think I get, okay, which is fine. And I get that because it's like, if we're going to go into the relationship, it would be better to know up front, like, hey, this person has, some CSA issues and stuff. And so it's not about me. I don't have to personalize it. To me, those are key changes when you get to that point. However, of course, for us as survivors, that's not like we automatically have that language. It took me years to get to that point. And like you said, you want to be loved. So oftentimes we keep those things inside and hidden. The relationship goes, and there we are for years, and then things start coming up, and then they're like, what's going on, right? And so that's often how it actually, I'm going to say, manifests. But anyway, let's hear a story here. Thank you for the individual that actually wrote this one, and hopefully it will help somebody out there too as they deal with these different type of things.
My name is Miguel. I'm 38 years old. I've been with my partner Daniel for almost 7 years. Last spring we got engaged. Most people assumed I'd be excited. And I was, at least part of me was. Daniel is kind, patient, funny. The kind of person who remembers little things. The kind of person who notices when something is bothering you before you've said a word. For years he was the safest relationship I'd ever had. Which is why I couldn't understand what started happening after we got engaged. The closer we got to the wedding, the more distant I became. Not because I stopped loving him. Not because I was having second thoughts. Not because I wanted out. The truth was exactly the opposite. I wanted the relationship. I wanted the future we were building. I wanted everything we'd spent years creating together. Yet the more real it became, the more uncomfortable I felt. At first, it was small things. I'd stay later at work, spend more time scrolling on my phone, find projects around the apartment that suddenly needed attention. Anything to keep my mind occupied, anything to avoid slowing down. Daniel noticed before I did. One night, we were sitting on the couch looking at potential wedding venues. He was excited, talking about ideas, making plans, dreaming out loud. I should have been doing the same thing. Instead, I felt trapped, not by him, by the conversation, by what it represented, the future, commitment, being known, being seen. The more he talked, the more anxious I became. Eventually, he stopped and looked at me. Then he said something I'll never forget. I feel like every time we get closer, you disappear. The room went silent because I knew he was right. I just didn't know why. Over the next few months, it kept happening. Whenever we had conversations about the future, I shut down. Whenever he wanted to talk about emotions, I became distant. Whenever he wanted more connection, I seemed to retreat. It made no sense. This wasn't a bad relationship. This wasn't an unsafe person. This was the healthiest relationship I'd ever experienced. Yet part of me kept responding as though something dangerous was happening. The worst part was watching it hurt him. Daniel wasn't angry. He was confused, and honestly, so was I. One weekend, we took a trip to the coast. No wedding planning, no work, no distractions, just the two of us. We spent the day walking along the water, talking about life, talking about our future, talking about what we wanted the next chapter of our lives to look like. It should have been one of those moments I remembered forever. Instead, I felt myself pulling away again, not physically, emotionally. The closer he moved toward me, the more some invisible part of me wanted distance. That night, lying in bed beside him, I finally admitted something to myself. I was afraid, not of Daniel, not of marriage, not of commitment. I was afraid of being vulnerable with someone who mattered that much. For years, I thought intimacy was supposed to feel safe. It never occurred to me that for someone with my history, intimacy could also feel dangerous. It never occurred to me that love, vulnerability, and fear had become tangled together long before I ever met Daniel.
So maybe you see yourself or hear yourself, I'm going to say, in Miguel's story. And it's not because, you just got engaged, or it's not because you're in a relationship, but because you've experienced that, I'm going to call it that strange push and pull between wanting connection and feeling uncomfortable, when it actually arrives. You want people close, right? But then you need your space. And so you want to be understood, but then you find yourself, oh, I better not share that, or you find yourself holding back things, and you're like, yeah, I want intimacy, but then you feel the urge to retreat. And this is what creates, I'm going to say, a lot of the confusion, the enormous confusion, especially because that desire for connection is genuine, right? We all want to connect. We all want to be loved. And so we want to make sure it's like, well, this person, are we pretending? Are they manipulating? They aren't intentionally pushing me away. That's probably what the other person is thinking. And they truly want love. They truly want friendship. They truly want connection. Yet, I'm going to say those things, when they become emotionally real, sometimes I'm going to say some of the things inside start sounding the alarms. Remember, we talked about kind of the threat meter actually goes off. And so then the closer that someone gets, the more exposed that we actually feel. And so the more exposed that we feel, then the more vulnerable that we actually become. And then what do? Then there's this urge, of course, to protect ourselves because it's seen as a threat. And so then for many survivors, the protection, it looks like emotional distance. It looks like shutting down or becoming irritable, or, I've got all this work to do. It becomes so busy, right? And it's like, it's so critical. I've got to get it done. And some of us, though, we just simply disappear, right? And so maybe we do disappear behind the work, hobbies, responsibilities, or distractions. Our behavior might look a little bit different, erratic. But the pattern is usually often the same. And so the relationship, as it becomes more intimate, then as survivors, sometimes we just become, I'm going to say, less available. And so for many survivors, the problem, like we said, isn't that we don't want connection. The problem is that connection activates old fears that we don't even realize that we're carrying. All right, so where are these fears for us? Where are they coming from? And of course, to answer that question, we got to go back to the CSA, the childhood sexual abuse, that teaches many of us as survivors about closeness, trust, and vulnerability. So the CSA root, right? So to understand why I'm going to say love can feel unsafe, we need to understand that abuse actually teaches a child about closeness. So you've heard me talk about healthy relationships. Well, if we have healthy relationships, then what they're going to do is they're going to teach the child that connection actually is safe, that the people who love you also are the ones that protect you, that vulnerability actually leads to comfort, right? So I can be myself, it's okay. And that trust leads to safety. So when that is being seen and that is being lived, then that's a good thing. However, the abuse teaches us something very, very different, especially when the abuse comes from someone, that we love, the child that we love, and someone that we trusted, right? Someone we admired. And it's hard when you're a child, right? Because you have to depend upon adults. You have to depend on, older people to take care of you. And so those that claim to care for you are the ones that are hurting you. And so now what happens, the child is faced with this impossible contradiction. It's just so amazing when we think about the brain, and even at, early ages, the things that it's doing, the maneuvers and the neurons that are firing, that are taking place. And it's just like, when you think about all those things going on inside of a child's brain and it's not even fully developed yet, it's like, wow. And I think sometimes we often forget that. And so when we're faced with this impossible contradiction, the person creating fear is often the same person that we expected to provide safety, right? So you've got that contradiction going on. Or so the person who's violating your boundaries is also the person showing you affection. You're like, wait, what's going on, right? Or the person who's causing the harm might also be saying, and as we started out with this word, I love you. And that just wreaks havoc in the brain. So the child's developing mind, those messages they're tangled together. And so then that's why love becomes confusing. Trust becomes confusing. Closeness becomes confusing, because the child has learned that people can say that they care while actually doing hurtful things. We learn that vulnerability can actually be exploited, and we learn that being emotionally open actually can lead to more pain. And of course, because of that, what happens? Well, this wonderful brain of ours as kids, what we do is we just start creating protective, adaptive strategies. So we stay guarded, we stay careful, we stay alert, we don't let people get too close, we don't, give out too much information, and we make sure that we don't need too much, right? Because that really makes us vulnerable if we have to depend upon someone. I just think about, my childhood. And yeah, I did grow up during a time, where they call it the latchkey kids, where, you get up, you go out, ride your bike or whatever. But I mean, I was the type of individuals, like I'd figure out whatever to do it on my own. That was just it, right? Because it's like, if I needed you, then that made me vulnerable, because then that meant that you might take advantage of me, right? So just imagine a child at that age thinking at that level and using those type of adaptations. It's like, it doesn't even seem to make sense. But what they do is they help the child to actually navigate the environment that feels unsafe, unpredictable, and overwhelming. And so what happens? Well, we grow up, right? And so now we grow up, and then the survivors, we start entering relationships, falling in love, building friendships, creating a family. But yet there's part of our nervous system that is still operating off of those old instructions. We'll call them our mixed tapes. For those of you that are around my age, you know what a mixtape actually is. And so those messages are saying, be careful, protect yourself, don't get hurt. And so when someone gets emotionally close, then guess what? Two things can happen at the same time. So part of me longs for connection, right? But then there's part of me that's preparing for danger. There's part of me that wants to be known, and yet there's part of me that wants to hide. There's part of me that wants intimacy, and then there's another part of me that wants to escape. So can you see what's going on inside of the brain? And that's one of the reasons sometimes when you talk to survivors and they'll just say, man, relationships are just so exhausting and so confusing. Well, now you can see why, because you can see the dynamics that are going on inside that person's brain, right? You got the push and pull and tug, and you're just trying to figure out. It's like you can never figure out. This is the way I can explain it. You can never figure out like what's real. Okay, so this person is showing me that they love me, but I've had this experience in the back. And so then I'm like, so do they really or do they not? Right. And so you're fighting two completely different impulses at the same time. You want to connect, right? But you need to protect, right? And so neither impulse actually is wrong, but they're both shaped by our experiences that belong to the past. And so that's why many survivors, they aren't afraid to love itself, but they're afraid of what vulnerability once cost them. And so that's what comes up to the front. So those are kind of the roots when we're talking about the CSA roots and how this all fits together. But then guess what? Well, we've got reinforcing factors, right? And so when we talk about reinforcing factors, it's like, okay, well, what is actually, helping this? And so when we think about the confusion that's created by abuse, I'm going to say it wasn't, just that, right? But sometimes, let's just say it was a parent who dismissed their feelings. And so now I want you to think about, okay, you've had the trauma, and now you've got trauma layering on top of trauma. Right. So you've got the parent. Hopefully they're not the one that's also abusing you, but you got the parent who dismisses your feelings. And so then how does that feel as a kid? Right. Or you've got maybe a friend who betrays your trust. Okay, well, that's another pile right on top. Or sometimes a partner who uses vulnerability as a weapon. And if you're in that type of relationship, I'm going to tell you, you need to find a safer relationship to actually be part of, because they probably got their own issues going on. Or each experience just adds another layer to that belief that emotional closeness actually comes with risk. And so then I'm going to say for many men, the culture that we live in actually reinforces this message as well. And so then we're being taught, hey, you got to be strong. You have to be independent. What was that song by Desiree? You got to be bad. You got to be bold. You got to be whatever it is. I can't remember. That just came into my mind when I saw that, being stronger. But yeah, so you got to be independent. You got to handle your problems. You got to keep moving, and you can't appear to be weak, because your experience is that people, of course, prey on the weak, right? Now, none of those messages may not necessarily be harmful on their own, but the problem is that for survivors, often when we hear them, we're hearing them through the lens of earlier wounds, okay? And so for us, it's like a megaphone that's shouting. So strength becomes emotional isolation, independence becomes distance, and then self-protection becomes disconnection. So then for us over time, we learn how to maintain relationships without fully entering them, right? And so how can we talk about those? Well, we talk about sports, we talk about current events, we'll talk a little bit about the kids, we'll talk about the weather, anything except for what's really happening inside. And so people may know the facts about, our life, but people very often don't know us or know him. And so, the irony is that when we talk about this, many survivors actually become skilled, very skilled in caring for others. They're very supportive of their partners. They're loyal to their friends, dedicated to their parents, very dependable co-workers, but they often give the very thing that they are struggling to receive, right? So they can offer understanding, patience, compassion, encouragement, all these different type of things. And yet when those same things are offered to them, oh, does it feel uncomfortable? It's vulnerable, right? The walls go up, the subjects change, right? And the distance return. And it's not because we don't want connection, but it's because that connection just feels uncertain. It's like, what do they really want? Okay. Now, and then of course that feels dangerous. And so think of the person who's caught in this cycle, longing for these things, but realizing there's like a catch-22. If I see those things, that must mean that there is something that is actually attached to that. So what many survivors call, I'm going to say, a relationship problem is often a protection strategy that pretty much has outlived its purpose. So let's dive a little bit into the neuroscience, and I can't go as deep as I usually do. Because at this point, you might be wondering, if this is you and you're dealing with this, you're like, well, man, Coach T, why does this keep happening? You know, why does intimacy feel uncomfortable even when the relationship is healthy? Or why does vulnerability feel risky even when the person in front of me, you know, they've never given me a reason to be afraid, but it happens, guys. That's why I said this nervous system stuff is so important. I have, you know, I'm working with clients and like, man, you know, I do so well, and then I just get to this point, and I know it's irrational, but it's like, well, that's your nervous system just taking over, which is one of the reasons why we have to do things consistently to give the brain some different options. And so the answer does have a lot to do with the nervous system processing safety and danger. So your nervous system is constantly gathering information from the world around you, right? And so it's just asking questions, which you guys know my first one is, am I safe? Right? And then, well, can I relax? Well, if I'm not safe, of course not. You know, do I need to protect myself in this situation? Can I really trust what that person is saying? And most of the time, this process just happens automatically. I mean, you're not even really thinking about it. It's like you're on automatic. And then long before you're consciously aware of it. So for us as survivors, when we enter a close relationship, the nervous system isn't just responding to the present moment. What it's doing, it's comparing the present moment to everything that it has learned from the past, right? That's the abuse and all those different type of things. And so that's important because intimacy requires something unique. Intimacy actually requires vulnerability, right? But for us, vulnerability means lowering defenses. It means being seen, being known, and allowing another person to access parts of yourself that you've worked very hard to protect. I mean, it's almost like a pride thing. Yeah, I've worked really hard to protect these, and so I don't allow people access to those parts. And so then for many of us as survivors, that's where our nervous system actually becomes conflicted. So the brain recognizes, hey, this relationship probably is safe, but then the nervous system, another part of us says, hey, but you remember what happened in the past? What happened when those boundaries were crossed? Remember what happened when that person touched you, right? And so remember when your vulnerability was exploited. And so then the result is that our nervous system begins responding to the intimacy as though it were a threat. And not because the current person is dangerous or the relationship is unhealthy, but it's just going back and it's picking up, we're going to say, that mixtape from the past. And so maybe you notice those things because the nervous system, is it asking, well, is this a safe person? Or is it asking, hey, have I felt something like this before? Right? And if the answer connects to the old experience of betrayal, abuse, manipulation, rejection, or harm, then that protective response, of course, is going to be activated. And so your mind might want connection, but your body's having a hard time doing that, right? And so someone hugs you and you just freeze up, or maybe your heart is moving toward intimacy, but your nervous system is actually moving towards protection. So you can see all the things that are going on, because for many survivors, healing isn't learning how to love. It's teaching the nervous system that love and danger are no longer the same thing. All right. So let's talk about, like we always said, what is it often that we're kind of getting wrong? I don't even know if wrong is the word. I'm going to say maybe misconstrued when we're working about this. I'm going to say one of the biggest misconceptions when we're talking about this for survivors is believing that their difficulty with intimacy means that they don't know how to love, right? It's like, well, maybe I just don't know how to love. I don't know what it looks like. And yet the reality is there are many of us out there. I mean, we love very deeply and we care very deeply. And you're the type of person you practically would do almost anything for anybody because you do care about. And so the problem isn't really that there's a lack of love. The problem is, and you probably already know where Coach T is going with this, it's a lack of safety. And so unfortunately for many of us, we misinterpret, I'm going to say even our own reactions. And so when we pull away, we assume that, I must don't care enough. Or when the relationship becomes difficult, we assume that, I just chose the wrong person. Or when intimacy feels uncomfortable, so, you're a cuddler, like me, but then sometimes that just feels uncomfortable. And then you assume, there's something wrong with me on the inside. And so then you start questioning the relationship. And so you start questioning the feelings, you start questioning yourself. And then what you often fail to recognize is that the discomfort and danger are not exactly the same thing, right? So just because vulnerability feels uncomfortable doesn't mean that you actually are unsafe. Now, trust, of course, is not something that appears fully formed, right? So even just think about as we talk about, the childhood. I mean, trust is something that grows, and it grows through evidence. And so, your parents, your caregiver, your friends, they're constantly helping you or taking care of you. And so the trust is actually being built, right? And so it's built, we're going to say, one moment at a time, one conversation at a time, one experience at a time, moment by moment. But the problem is for us as survivors, because of the abuse, many times we're just waiting for certainty. Okay, so certainty. So we're not taking it, moment by moment. And so we just want to be able to not feel any fear, to not feel any anxiety, to feel completely secure in the moment. But healing often happens actually while those feelings are still present, not after they disappear. And so maybe one of our misconceptions as survivors is believing that protecting yourself, protecting ourselves, and connecting with others are actually opposite choices, when in reality, they're not. Because healthy relationships actually require both. It requires boundaries and it requires vulnerability. It requires wisdom, and it also requires openness. It requires discernment, but it also requires trust. And so the goal is not to remove every single wall. The goal is to learn which wall still serves you and which walls are keeping you lonely, that are keeping you isolated, right? Because there's a difference. protection can keep you safe, but isolation keeps everyone out. And so for many years, as survivors, we spent these years calling isolation protection. And when the reality is that intimacy is always going to involve some type of risk. And sometimes as survivors, we don't want to hear that. We don't want to go there, but that's the reality. You guys know, like I always give the analogy is like, in our lives, someone has, thrown the garbage into your backyard over the fence. It's not your garbage, but someone has thrown it into your yard. And unfortunately, the only way you're going to get rid of the garbage is you have to pick it up yourself. And so for us as survivors, we have to work through the issues. And sometimes, man, it just feels so unfair. And it is. But the reality is, if we want the garbage gone, we're the ones who have to pick it up. And so then for us as survivors, sometimes we believe that fear means that we shouldn't move closer. But fear is, I'm going to say, simply evidence that, I'm going to say that you're standing at the edge of something that is really important. So if I were to take that, it's like, okay, how can I, reframe that? That's what I would see the fear as, that it's evidence, one, that you're not dead, you're alive, right? But you're standing on the edge of something and something's getting ready to change. And so can I step into that and actually embrace that? I think that's what's really important and then what's key. All right. So what do we do now? We move into, what do we do? What is some strategy?
Consider this your wake-up call. Boom! What was that? Me dropping some knowledge on you.
All right. So this is where our strategy comes in. That always reminds me of Dougie Fresh. 6 minutes, Dougie Fresh, you're on. Yeah, I know I'm dating myself. You're like, who is that? Who's Dougie Fresh? I know. Okay.
6 minutes, 6 minutes, 6 minutes, Dougie Fresh, you're on.
All right. So for those of you that are from that genre and that culture, you remember Dougie Fresh. So when we talk about the strategy, so you're probably asking yourself, okay, Coach T, where do I begin? Do I need to go out and force myself to be vulnerable, or, do I need to go out and tell everyone everything and tell my story? No, but if you're going to tell your story, come on into the safe place, come into the coaching groups. And it's not by trying to bulldoze, I'm going to say, your way through the fear. And so the goal isn't to become emotionally exposed overnight. And let me tell you, there can be some repercussions to that. I share with you guys, I remember, dating different people and stuff. And I was just like, and you guys know me, I kind of have that gung-ho, which is really gung-ho, personality. Is like, okay, I'm just going to let them know it all now. We call it emotional vomiting, right? And so sometimes it doesn't work to be emotionally exposed like overnight, to just do that. A lot of people can't handle that. And so the goal is to slowly, I'm going to say, expand your capacity for safe connection. So for many of us as survivors, intimacy, it does feel like an all or nothing decision. That's why I was just explaining. That's what I was dealing with. It's like, well, either, I trust you completely or I don't trust you at all. Now, for those of you that have heard me before, the all or nothing syndrome, especially for a lot of us that were abused in the early years, childhood development. And do you remember that stage where your parents would tell you something, and if your parents said it, that's exactly what it was? And sometimes, they might be joking and they say that something, hey, the grass is purple. But in your mind, because they said it and you trust them, the grass is purple. And so then when someone else comes up and says, well, no, actually the grass is green. Oh, you can't have all or nothing, right? No, the grass is purple, it's green. Oftentimes that's what it is for us as male survivors, because sometimes the abuse actually took place during those developmental childhood years. And so you're still on that all or nothing. Okay, so I completely trust you or I don't. Either I tell you everything or I tell you nothing. But when we're talking about strategy for healthy relationships, they're usually are built somewhere in the middle. Like we said, trust develops gradually, one conversation at a time, one shared experience at a time, one, I'm going to say, act of reliability at a time or honesty. And so that's the place where the safety actually begins, paying attention where you feel that urge to pull away, not just physically, but emotionally also. So the strategy is to notice those moments when someone asks you maybe a deeper question and you immediately change the subject. Now, these are things like when I'm doing with coaching, like we do on the calls, and I might, just throw out there and say, okay, so if you're dealing with this, maybe notice, like just for the next, let's just say week, notice when someone asks you what you consider to be maybe a deep emotional question, and then notice, do you automatically change the subject? Do you reflect and direct in a different way? Notice those moments, right? Or when someone expresses care for you, do you notice yourself minimizing it? And maybe even thinking, yeah, right? Or do you actually acknowledge it and actually allow yourself to feel it? Or maybe notice moments when someone wants to know what's happening inside of you. And then you just simply respond with, I'm fine. Now, I'm not asking you to judge this. I'm just asking you to notice it, to be aware. And it's interesting because it's now when people say, hey, how you doing? And the first thing I'll say to them, I'm like, do you really want to know? Because if you do, I'm like, here it comes. I'm going to give you what's there. But until we get to that point, we're like, yeah, I'm fine. Right. And what did fine? I can't remember. What was the acronym for fine? Oh, freaked out, insecure, neurotic. And I can't remember what the E was. But anyway, but I'm fine. Right. So, but don't judge yourself. Just notice. And that's because awareness is the first step. And then ask yourself another question. It's like, what am I protecting right now? Okay. Not what am I avoiding, but what am I protecting right now? Not what's wrong with me, but what am I protecting now? And that's because beneath many of our defensive reactions, the nervous system is, once again, trying to keep you safe. That's what the job is. And so the goal isn't to eliminate the protection. The goal is to determine whether the protection is still necessary or not. So the alarm is going off, but is this a false alarm? Or is this an alarm that we need to listen to? And so don't be vulnerable all at once, but maybe practice a little bit of vulnerability. In other words, test the waters. I used to do that all the time before I would test the water and say, okay, let's see how the person, can handle this information or if they're going to react to this, or they're just going to kind of shut down and just look at the walls because it feels uncomfortable for them. It's like, okay, that's not a safe subject to approach that individual with. And so just start paying attention to when these things happen. Notice maybe how you're responding. And then what happens is over time, these small experiences start to begin teaching your nervous system something new, right? Once you're aware of them, and then you start actually responding. And that means that being known doesn't always lead to harm. Hey, you know what? I was able to share a little information there, and it actually was a good thing, or I was actually vulnerable and it didn't lead to regret. Now, here's the thing, though. You have to realize, and this is where our resiliency comes through, and that's why I love doing resiliency coaching with male survivors, is because there are going to be times when we are vulnerable and it might lead to a little regret, or we think of it as regret. But I want you to reframe it from this perspective. If you're vulnerable and it doesn't lead exactly to where you want to, like maybe the other person, it's too much for them, I want you to mark it down as, oh, okay, so now I know. Okay, that's it. Just now I know. What do I know? Now I know that person can't handle me in that place, in that spot, or with that information. That's good information to have, right? So it's like, okay, so we keep the boundary, whatever, at this level. That was something I had to work through and learn. And so that connection can be uncomfortable, but also safe at the same time, right? Now, as survivors, I just want to throw this out here. Our goal isn't to trust everyone, okay? The goal is to slowly learn that some people can be trusted, okay? Some people can be trusted. And that's what we mean when we're talking about, the resiliency. I'm trying to think of a client that I had. I can't remember his name. Okay, yeah. So there was one client I had, and I noticed over the years that they will often come into coaching believing that their problem actually was the relationship. And so, they think, hey, my issue is communication or conflict or, commitment or I'm just not compatible, whatever, with the other person, the other individual. Yeah, and sometimes those things are actually part of the picture. But often there's I'm going to say something deeper that's happening underneath. And so I remember one survivor, he told me, he's like, man, every relationship starts out great, but he's like, it ends the same way. And so then when I asked him, I said, well, what do you mean? And so he said, at first I can't wait to be around them. Then eventually I start feeling trapped. Okay. And so that word, when he said that, caught my attention, trapped, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're looking at patterns and different things. I'm like, okay, not bored, not unhappy, not unloved. This is what my brain is thinking. He used that word, trapped. And so then as we started to explore, I'm going to say his history, what I noticed is that a pattern actually started to emerge. And so every time something became emotionally important to him, his anxiety increased. The more that he cared, the more afraid he actually became of losing them. And then the more afraid of losing them, right, then the more distance that he actually created. And so the distance would frustrate the other person, and then the conflict would follow. And then guess what happens? So eventually the relationship starts to suffer. So then what looked like, I'm going to say, fear of commitment was actually a fear of vulnerability. What looked like disinterest was actually self-protection. And then what looked like emotional distance for him was actually emotional overwhelm. And so when we were coaching together, I remember kind of his breakthrough. And so the breakthrough came when he stopped asking, of course, what's wrong with this relationship? And then he started asking, so this was the question I prompted him, what happens inside of me when someone gets close, right? And sometimes it's just simply like figuring out what is the right questions actually to ask ourselves. And when we did that, and when he did that, that shift changed actually everything. So instead of focusing exclusively on the other person, he became curious about his own reactions. I had to talk about that study. I think they call it the curiosity molecule or something, whatever, in the brain, which is pretty cool. So anyway, he started noticing when the anxiety appeared, when he wanted to withdraw, when he wanted to shut down, when he wanted to create distance. And like we said, it wasn't to judge himself. He just needed to notice. It was to simply understand what was happening. So over time, he started beginning to recognize that those reactions that, they weren't proof that the relationship was unsafe. They were just reminders that part of him still expected closeness to actually come with a cost. And so then as that awareness grew for him, then so did his ability to stay present. Now, look, it's not perfect, right? Not every time, but there was more often than it was before. And those are the small moments that start creating those new experiences, start giving the brain, oh, you know what? There are other options out here as opposed to this mixtape that continually rewinds and plays the same message, right? And so moments where vulnerability actually didn't lead to harm and moments where honesty actually strengthened the relationship. And so not forcing yourself to become vulnerable, not convincing yourself that you're never afraid, but just learning how to stay present long enough, I'm going to say, for a different experience to occur. And I believe that's what's important, because many survivors, we spend years trying to protect ourselves from being hurt. But guess what? Healing often begins when we discover that we can protect and connect at the same time. All right, guys, there is your Thursday morning. Hey, and I hope that was helpful for you guys. And oh, my timer's going off for my bagels. That means my bagels have risen. I need to get them going in the boiling water. All right, so let's close up today. Let's close it with a kind of reflection here. So as we wrap up this morning, I want to leave you with a question. So not a question to answer right now and not a problem to solve. Just something maybe to carry with you this week, weekend, whatever, till the next time. So what if the distance that you create isn't because you don't want connection? What if it's because connection matters so much to you? Okay. And so for many survivors, that's the painful irony. So the people they pull away from, they're often the people that they actually care about the most. The relationships that trigger the most fear are often the relationships that they value the most. Not because love is the problem, but because love requires vulnerability. And so a vulnerability to be seen, a vulnerability to be known, and the vulnerability to matter. Okay? But remember, we got to feel safe first. And that's what's really important, starting out with safety. All right, guys. Hey, feel free to go up to the website, bettermalesurvivors.com. Check out all the stuff up there. If you got individuals, whatever, in your relationship, and they're just going crazy because they don't understand what the heck you're doing, and send them up to the I Love a Male Survivor page, resources there. So there's things that they can download, they can listen to, and that will actually hopefully help them just to understand us just a little bit more in the things that we are dealing with. You know, if today's episode resonated, with you, I want you to remember something. And the fact that intimacy feels difficult doesn't mean that you're incapable of love. And the fact that vulnerability feels uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that you're broken, right? Between protection and intimacy, between being known and staying safe, this is where the healing takes place, right? And so the healthiest relationships don't require us to abandon our boundaries. They just simply invite us to stop hiding behind them. So I hope that today's conversation actually helped you some way to better understand yourself, what you're dealing with. And if someone else, you haven't listened to this podcast too, feel free when you go on the social media, hit those likes, whatever, subscribe, whatever. Just let me know that you're out there, that you're listening. If you got things you want me to cover, that would be great. For those of you that are thinking like, you know what? I think I want to join. That coaching program, right? Then just go up to the website, start with the Life by Design first, right? Because it's a little 10-day email thing that's going to carry you through some things so you can find out, okay, is this going to be a good coaching, whatever, for me, right? And so it's going to take you through little things like I do now, but you're going to be writing through things, thinking through a few things. You're like, okay, wow, this this is really good. And then you're like, okay, so now I want to learn a bit more about the program. And so that gives you an opportunity. All right, guys. So love doesn't have to feel unsafe. And so then just remember this simply, that the person who's talking to you on this mic right now does care about you. And I know it's hard if I say, the word I love you, because we just talked about love feels unsafe. But I just want you to know, with time, even using that word, and we think about that word, when we start working through the stuff, and then someone says that they actually love us, and we can actually feel it, and it's not attached to those resonating messages of abuse, I'm just going to tell you, it's a beautiful and wonderful thing. So as I tell my clients, whatever it is today, do something. All right, guys, we'll see you in our next pod.